Paula. Good to be here with you this morning. We are just a little over 2 months into the new year, 2021, and already volumes of history have been recorded. There are times when we need to have a bird's eye view to understand this particular moment in which we find ourselves. So it might feel like we're having a new experience when we may actually be in a long experience of unfinished business that needs to be brought to conclusion and fulfillment of long overdue aspirations and promises. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King addressed Unitarian Universalists 55 years ago at our General Assembly when he spoke as the Ware lecturer. It was 1966. And he said to us, quote, "One of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the new situation demands. There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution. And there can be no denying of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our world today." End quote. Dr. King inspired and embodied the building of the beloved community. If we, Unitarian Universalists, are to build the beloved community, then we must recognize the systemic and the subtle ways in which oppression works to shape our relationships to power, specific issues, and to each other. If we are to build the beloved community, eliminating oppression must be central to our mission and daily practices as spiritual communities and as activists. Dr. King spoke of segregation as an evil. And although segregation was to end with legislation, we all see how the attitudes and practices that supported segregation continue to support voter suppression, which is a serious issue right now, mass incarceration, police brutality and killings of unarmed people of color, the abuse of immigrants, and a myriad of injustices. The whole world witnessed an insurrection in an attempt to overthrow the national election, doing harm with also, and to overthrow government with the intent of also doing harm to elected officials to deny democracy and our most basic civil right, the right to vote. The threat was repeated just a week ago, and Congress canceled their session. Noam Chomsky said that, and I quote, "Democracy is a threat to power systems," end quote. The president of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker, made this claim even more relevant the day after the insurrection when he said, quote, "White supremacy is the greatest threat to democracy, and democracy is the greatest threat to white supremacy." He says that this is the cause of America's crisis. We have unequal, unjust systems that teeter on our acceptance of systemic racism and oppression. At times, the manifestations are so subtle that they escape notice by many. And sometimes they are so blatant that no amount of reasoning or rationalizing can mask the motivation to maintain unequal systems. The evil of segregation that Dr. King spoke of and fought against was just one expression of a larger system of white supremacy. White supremacy is an evil that has been normalized throughout the history of this country. It has never been adequately addressed or eradicated. So evil, how do we talk about it? How do we, as Unitarian Universalists, relate to evil? It is said that Unitarian Universalism does not have a theology of evil. I am calling this claim of no theology of evil into question. So let me step back for just a moment to provide some perspective on how I see evil through a contemporary lens. I had a personal experience about 5 years ago that led me to a very clear belief in the power of collective positive intention and action. This is not a revolutionary idea, but it can have revolutionary results. We watch it in practice constantly. The profound experience that I had made me stop and pay attention. And I began to wonder, how can we galvanize more of this power in our Unitarian Universalist ministries? Then 4 years ago, while I was trying to figure out how to live in a society that was becoming more and more hostile, it was apparent that just as I believe in the power of collective positive intention and action, I must also reckon with its opposite. Now, I don't believe in evil as a supernatural demon or devil, but we have long been confronting the power of collective negative intention and action. This is what social justice movements are about. Collective power taking on another source of power that is doing harm to the community. Unitarian Universalists are driven by the call to social justice. It's central to our values and our identity. We have a history of confronting the forces of injustice. We might not use the language of evil, but I think that when we confront injustice, we are putting our theology into action. And in there is a theology of evil that we are expressing by our actions, but not by our words. Why not? It helps to name things. When I first spoke about this 4 years ago, it was because I believed we were not prepared for what was to come our way. And quite frankly, it was worse than I even imagined it would be. So it's time that we name the power of collective negative intention and action and develop a theology of evil. We need to understand the spiritual and the structural forces that are at play, both the collective negative intentions and actions and the collective positive intentions and actions. We can't be passive about it and assume that it's not happening or that it's not affecting us. It's affecting all of us. We need to be actively engaged in spiritual practices that fulfill our principles and respect the inherent worth and dignity of all people and of communities. The eighth principle is a spiritual calling for us to pay attention and to develop ongoing practices of dismantling racism and oppression. This is how we can fulfill our role in building strong communities around justice and inclusion, which is something that needs to be affirmed far and wide in an emerging culture of white nationalism and authoritarianism. The eighth principle keeps us relevant to the world in which we live today. We can't want so much for things to be okay that we avoid seeing the work that needs to be done to make things okay. No one is finished with this work. No one is finished with this work. People who are most negatively impacted by discrimination and injustice in its many forms have been saying for years what needs to change. That's why we march and we rally, to raise the level of awareness of injustices that are deeply affecting our communities. That is why the labor movements grew around economic justice, the civil rights around racial justice, the women's movement around equality for women and justice, Stonewall for the LGBTQ rights, Standing Rock was for Indigenous peoples' rights to protect their resources and their health. The March for Our Lives, organized by young people for gun control and for safety in their schools. The 99% movement for economic justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement for racial justice and police accountability. And the list goes on and on. Not only does the list continue, but the fight for justice in all of these cases is still underway. We haven't finished. We haven't done the work. People have been telling us, and they keep telling us, that it is time for social change. It's important to be able to see these calls for justice and the movements from the perspective of collective positive intention and collective negative intention. Not enough has moved yet. Every time we challenge injustices and call for changes in the structures that perpetuate oppression, we ourselves are saved. Now, I grew up as a Unitarian Universalist, and I identify as an agnostic humanist. And when I say that we are saved, it's because when someone else receives justice, a piece of our own humanity is restored too. And the world actualized has a greater sense of peace and the unfolding of human potential. Justice matters to our own faith formation and our development as human beings. And we often hear about the gap between our aspirations and our lived reality. The eighth principle calls us into practice in that gap, living our UU values more fully. So rather than feeling that our work as individuals has been done, the eighth principle opens up a whole new realm of what there is to do. And it is in this new realm where our spiritual awakening and the revival of Unitarian Universalism can take place. The eighth principle helps to build a bridge between now and what is possible for us in light of the beloved community that we talk about. So the eighth principle is still young, and it can be difficult to explain. Nearly 40 congregations have adopted it to date. We are finally at a point where there are congregations that can give us an idea of the benefits of having an eighth principle as part of the spiritual journey. Now, this is not to say that what the eighth principle calls us to do is new. It's not new. What is new is centering it in all that we do, and not just treating this work of justice and inclusion as social justice projects in the larger church environment, where everything else stays the same. We have been talking about transformation for years, but it has been somewhat elusive because many people have a hard time imagining what would be different. So I'm going to share with you what some ministers and people of color shared in our December and January 8th Principle Learning Community. Reverend Fitzgerald from Honolulu said, I quote, "Some of my colleagues have said that they wish that Unitarian Universalism would come into its fullness of valuing all lives, but it hasn't. The eighth principle is an important theological statement that brings in the beloved community and anti-oppression language with a result as we talk about accountability and being in action. The blessing it has been to minister to a congregation where the eighth principle is happening is that it is being incorporated in the different ways that people are beginning to think and act. The eighth principle must be owned by the congregation. The minister embodies and proclaims the good news of the eighth principle, but it must be owned by the congregation. If you want to attract people under 40, you should probably adopt the eighth principle. This is what they are talking about, and this is what they want to see in their lives." End quote. Next, Reverend Crestwell from Maryland said, quote, "The world has changed. This is the dawning of a new age of consciousness, and we see it in our children. White supremacy has become overt. People of color are not just making this up. We all know it now. After the pandemic and the past administration, Unitarian Universalism is essentially behind. So where does that leave those of us who haven't even gotten to the eighth principle yet? The Unitarian Universalism that will thrive into the new age is going to be anti-racist. We have been waiting for this, and it's like the world just all of a sudden woke up. The change has already happened. We have to catch up." End quote. And Reverend Tanner from New Jersey said, I quote, as she was speaking, her daughter walked into the room and spoke to her, and she said, Reverend Tanner said, "Hearing my daughter's voice centers it for me. We don't have any time to waste. We don't have another generation of children who are expendable, and we can't live as if we do. We come from a long line of heretics, and what heresy are we called to now? What are we called to proclaim? I think we should be doing everything we can to not only dismantle racism, but to think about reconciliation and what are we moving toward?" End quote. So those are some pretty strong testimonies from ministers. Then we heard from people of color, and we asked them what difference the eighth principle would make for them. And this is what some of them shared. Allison from Honolulu said, quote, "It makes a huge difference. If we are not going to deal with the eighth principle, then everything else you tell me about the seven principles is not ringing true. If I would consider moving from Hawaii, I would be looking for a Unitarian Universalist church that has the eighth principle." End quote. Dorian from Maryland said, quote, "I knew intuitively that I was loved by my congregation, but for them to adopt the eighth principle was a tangible expression of that love. Not only did they adopt the eighth principle, but they began immediately doing the work. It has given me a brand new congregation that I feel a part of, and it is my congregation. It has been magic for me." End quote. And Lutricia says, "I am a Unitarian Universalist because I really do believe in the principles and I try to live them. And the UU Church is where I have my best chance to do that. The eighth principle is hard work. If we were really practicing it, it would be transformative and it would change our relationship not only to ourselves, but to our congregations and our community. End quote. Our work, the work of the liberal progressive church, is to build strong, inclusive communities and to join with communities that are using that power of their collective positive intention and action to help heal the wrongs and to correct some of the historic structures that perpetuate inequality and suffering. Our work is far from over. And given the way that this year began, we know that there's urgency in doing this. We can breathe a bit of relief now, and hopefully we can move forward with a renewed commitment and faith to not sleep through this important time of social change, but to do our work to intentionally bend the arc of justice. For us, the eighth principle becomes even more significant right now because it is about how we will hold ourselves accountable for being people and churches free of the perpetual evils of historic injustices. And I want to close now with these words from Dr. King's presentation that he gave us in 1966. Quote, "The great question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in such a period? Certainly, the church has a great responsibility because when the church is true to its nature, it stands as a moral guardian of the community and of society. It has always been the role of the church to broaden horizons and to change the status quo." End quote. And in closing, the words of the eighth principle. Let us journey toward spiritual wholeness by building a multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and oppression in ourselves and our institutions. May it be so. Amen.